What's going on, everybody? Welcome to BRB Time, where we're going to be taking a look at the Stormblood changes that are coming to PvP. Now, my channel is a PvP channel, of course, or a mostly PvP channel. I'm going to start doing a little bit more PvE as well. But these changes are pretty big to me, and I feel like a lot of people are panicking for a little bit of no reason, because these changes are actually pretty okay. So, without any more delay from me, I'm going to go ahead and jump directly into this and sort of dissect what's going on and maybe calm down some of the reactions that people are having to these very drastic changes. So, one of the first things on this list is, well, the first thing on this list, let's just go in order here, is that the level restriction is far too high for anyone who's just looking for a PvP game, right? I understand that Final Fantasy XIV is more PvE focused, but at the same time, PvP is an option, and with the level restriction being so high, it's hard for someone to pick up the game, try out PvP, and stick to it. That results in us having a very small community of very niche players. Um, so with them reducing it like they intend to, I believe they said they're reducing it to level 30 where you can begin. You're allowed to pick up the game, get your job stone, and you can immediately get into PvP. And if that's what you're interested in, you can do that all the way to end game, which is very good. That means that by the time you're at in game, you're very familiar with your abilities and you're familiar with your class. That's a good way to get started with it. Secondly, I completely agree that there are too many job actions in this game for PvP. While PvE has the luxury of not having so much usability for all these actions, for example, head graze on machinist, to my knowledge, it's not all that useful in PvE. However, in PvP, it's pretty useful for securing kills and locking down healers. So buttons like that are particularly useful in PvP that may not be useful in PvE contribute to there being a ridiculous amount of bloat for PvP. Now, there are players out there who may complain that um, abilities like head graze are integral to their rotation in PvP, but I would argue that they're not. I would argue that if you're bursting correctly, you're taking people out without needing to use head graze anyway. It's a great alternative. It's a great backup plan, backup burst if you need to do it. But at the same time, you don't always need that, so it doesn't really need to be there. The buttons that you need to be trimmed down. So that's all I'll say about that. The third point being PvP is unequal to PvE. That's something that I agree with. Like you should not be able to go clear something like Alexander and get gear that's better suited for PvP than the gear that drops from PvP. Do you get what I'm saying? That doesn't make any sense to me that I can go do a whole bunch of PvE stuff, go get a whole bunch of PvE gear, and be in best in slot for PvP. I feel like that's not fair to players who are just trying to do PvP because they enjoy the game type for the sake of it. So on top of that, your PvE skill really should not have too much an effect on your PvP skill. Yeah, you should understand your class and how it works, and like if you're playing Dragoon, you should know the right time to jump. But at the same time, that shouldn't make you dominate the PvP scene. The players who are doing PvP exclusively are the players who should be dominating that. That makes a little bit more sense to me. Just like a PvP player can't come into Alexander Savage and just destroy the boss by bursting, because that's not how the game works. Um, on the fourth point, I won't make a whole great big statement because I don't feel like that's a huge problem. For example, I don't mind the action point disparity. For example, Summoner doesn't need that many action points because abilities like Wither don't really have a huge effect on the match, to my knowledge. However, classes like Dragoon have an ridiculous amount of abilities that come from just their PvP sets. So, although I don't care that much about it, I think that it's probably a good idea to kind of like equalize it and trim it down a little bit, just so everybody has like the same sort of learning curve or skill curve going into PvP. And the final point on here is the overly complex controls. I agree. That goes back to the whole too many job action points as well. There's so many situations where the learning curve for something like Machinist or Dragoon or Monk is just so much higher. Or for example, like play any of the healers in Ranked Feast and you'll get what they're saying as far as like it being overly complex. Scholar is a good point to use as an example. if you're playing Scholar and Feast, you need to be able to micromanage your fairy as well as getting good positional yourself. So that's a good point. Overly complex, they need to trim it down, they need to calm it down, let new players get used to it and sort of get a feel for it so that they can also have fun in the game type. Because that's what it comes down to. It's about having a fun time with other players and having fun. So that's my point on that. So the very first point in this slide shows that I was correct. They are moving the job requirement down to level 30 to participate in PvP. Now this is something that I know a lot of players might be worried about because they think that new players are going to come in there and ruin their matches. But realistically, let's be honest. How many players have you bumped into at level 60 that still ruin your matches? It's going to happen regardless. So it's better to have people like learning at level 30 and getting prepared than it is to have them go the entire game with no PvP experience and jump into matches and ruin them anyway. So my statement to you would be to calm down, right? Stop worrying about who's going to ruin your match. Maybe learn what you can do better to carry, and just have some fun. Stop worrying about whether or not you're winning or losing PvP matches, and worry about just having a good time. Now I know that like winning is part of the good time for people, but keep in mind that if you're ruining other people's fun by yelling at them and complaining that you're losing in PvP, you're wasting time. You're not even doing damage. So just play the game, calm down, have a good time. Don't sweat it. Now the second point is something interesting. The PvP attributes being determined by role. That means that the tanks, your healers, or okay, your tanks are gonna all have the same abilities determined by role. Your healers are gonna have the same role determined abilities: melee DPS, range DPS, casters, so on and so forth. This means that there's going to be a specific pool of abilities that you can pull from, and I think that's interesting. Um, it depends on how large the pool is for each available class. Like we saw the melee DPS pool, and I think that it'll be interesting because you can only pick two of those. Um, so it means that you're going to either have to commit to playing really aggressive or commit to playing a little bit more passive or commit to healing CC off of your healer, so on and so forth. So I think that this is really good for making people specialize in their playstyle and making people understand how their class works in PvP. And the customization to it will allow people to play differently but still effectively depending on how they want to play. Your Dragoon friend who wants to dive into the middle of enemies and sort of defend themselves with like defensive buffs and stuff like that while killing kills is going to be a little bit more aggressive obviously than your playstyle if you're playing farther back and you're playing Dragoon as well. If you're playing Dragoon farther back and you like to jump in on ideal kills and then run away, you can play that type of style now because you will have specific abilities that or attributes that are set for that playstyle. This means that you can jump into PvP on any class and kind of play on however you want. However, this also means that classes like healers are not going to be able to like do DPS, I'm assuming. So if you look at one of my older videos where I'm playing Scholar and I'm getting Battle High, I'm pretty sure ideas like that are going to be gone entirely. Like I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to get Battle High on Scholar ever again. And this is because the point immediately after that being gear effects appearance only. That means I'm not going to be able to set my gear for intelligence only, so I'm not going to be able to put out DPS. So, rip, rest in peace, DPS Scholar, at least in PvP. And the final point is that the PvP hotbars are going to be set for each job. Now, this is something I'm not 100% cool with because I like my PvP and my PvE bar to be the exact same. I'm more comfortable knowing where my abilities are if I set them. But I understand why they're doing this. If you have these new players who don't know what they're doing, it trims down the action bar so that you only have the ones that are necessary and needed, and it means that overall the skill floor of players is going to come up because they only have the option of doing a good job. Because realistically, they only have a couple buttons to press, and all of them will be useful. So I would say again, guys, don't worry, don't sweat it. Just test it out. Just see what happens. See how well it applies, and if it's fun, then it's fun. Don't bash it just yet. So we're gonna move on to the next points. So now we're finally at the point where everyone has started complaining and overreacting. Okay, so the first point is all PvP actions are now PvP specific. and that there are 9 actions per job, 2 selectable options or actions, and adrenaline rush. So this does not seem to take into account the fact that, or the global cooldown abilities that are going to be switching underneath your fingers. Um, so although there are 9 actions, this only seems to apply to abilities. Like for example, the Dragoon shows having jump, spine shatter, dive, and like just some other abilities that are on their bar. Um, so what I'm assuming is that the 9 actions are not, for example, their vorpal thrust combo, or I mean their full thrust combo, or the or like heavy thrust and stuff like that. Though I didn't see heavy thrust in that list, so maybe I'm wrong. But the way it's looking right now is that the full thrust combo that is going to end up with like a wheeling thrust, right? And then your impulse rush combo is going to end up with like fang and claw, right? That's going to happen every single time. That's 8 buttons right there, so it can't possibly be 9 actions including those 8. So realistically, when you look at it, you already have really the same amount of buttons you were already doing. It seems like they got rid of abilities like life surge, which I'm not sure how I feel about, but if they added a way to compensate for that sort of thing, then I'm okay with it, right? Um, Same thing with power surge. Like it looks like jump is now running off of TP, and power surge and life surge and stuff like that. They may be just kind of like baked into the abilities, which would be cool, right? So if on every full thrust you get like life surge, like a weakened life surge or something like that, that'd be cool. Um, Also, since there are no more positionals in PvP, that means that monks, ninjas, dragoons, all you guys are going to be putting out a ton more damage because they're not worried about trying to hit enliven before they burst or trying to get like the back criticals for boot shine or stuff like that, right? So all this does is, like it says in that point, is it consolidates your hotbar so that you know what's going on. You're not looking at like 40 or 50 buttons to figure out what abilities you want to be doing. It's you do combo 1, you do combo 2, or you use some of your off cooldown abilities. So although this is what has people freaking out, people saying that the game has been simplified, I feel like this right here is probably the best change they could have done for PvP, because this means that new players are going to get into the game. They're not going to be perplexed or intimidated by all these new abilities that they have to use in addition to the PvP abilities, and they can just sort of like learn organically through playing the game and playing around people who are already really good. So the players out there that are top ranking, like your next crosses and shit like that, they're going to still be shitting on people. Realistically, they're still going to be doing a ton of damage. They're still going to be wrecking parties, but it means that the skill floor, those dragoons that party up and don't know how to use any of their abilities, they're going to be gone because they can only do combo 1 or combo 2 plus jump or spine shatter dive. So this is a good change. Realistically, this is really good. And that's really all I can say about it. At this point, I'm probably just going to show some of the combat that Yoshi P was doing. So I think at this point there's nothing else I can add to it. So if you've watched it this far, I want to say thanks. Thanks for watching, and I do want to say relax. Don't PV panic. Have a good time. Just kind of play PvP. Try it out, and if it sucks, everybody will know by the end of the 4.0 launch, right? And if it's really good, then that means that we have a great new combat system for PvP. This also means that I'm going to have to redo all of my videos for PvP, which I am silently cursing to myself about, but it means that PvP is evolving, and it means that Square Enix does actually care about the PvP community and that it has a chance of growing and becoming big. So please don't bash the new concepts. Please try them out. I hope you have a wonderful time with it. And again, I just want to say thanks for watching, and thank you so much for making it to the end. So without anything left to say, I will say take care, and I will see you next time.